oh my god, I want to be 16 again, but I don't want to go through pimples. Welcome back to Cuckoo for Books. My name is Salva, and today I'm going to be doing a book review on My Calamity Jane by Cynthia Hand, Brody Ashton, and Jody Meadows. So a little backstory on this whole trilogy for those of you who aren't familiar with the Lady Janie's trilogy. What these three authors do is they retell the story of Janes in literature or history and give it a bit of a comedic spin. Each book in the trilogy stands on its own. It doesn't have any connection with the previous books in the series, and the only thing they have in common is that all their protagonists are named Jane. I love the way they tell the stories. It's really hilarious. They break the fourth wall a lot. And something I've noticed about this trilogy is that each book has come out just when I desperately need a dose of laughter. Like the first book, My Lady Jane, which retells the story of Lady Jane Grey, who was queen for 9 days of England before she was beheaded by her cousin. Fun times. But they retold that story to give her a happy ending. That book came out when I had just moved into my dorm in college and I was really scared and experiencing a lot of culture shock. Just having this like super funny book around to read and to entertain me cheered me up greatly. The second book, which is called My Plain Jane, and it's a retelling of Jane Eyre, which is, I mean, it's a very drab, gothic, woe is me, pining love kind of story, and they infused that with a lot more like 21st century realness. I read that when I had taken a break from reading and booktubing for a year. That was in 2018, and I needed a book to make me fall in love with reading YA again, and it was the perfect book. And now the third book, which is about Calamity Jane, who was a heroine in the Wild West, came out in the middle of this thing our little world is experiencing. This book arrived when I needed it most, and so I was super happy to read it and I was super excited to get into it. What I didn't know coming into it, because I like to go into books as blind as possible, when I opened the book, I found out that Annie Oakley was one of the three protagonists, and I was like, one of the first storybooks I ever read was this book called Little Miss Sure Shot, and it was about Annie Oakley and Frank Butler and Annie Oakley's journey to stardom as a sharpshooter. When I started reading this book and Annie Oakley was one of the heroines of the book, I started getting like blips in my memory, like, oh, the first time she shot a gun, she got thrown back. I remembered reading that in the storybook I had as a kid. Her tricks, her bending over to shoot a card in the middle of the Ace of Hearts. Because this book did skew a little younger in terms of demographic, I was easily catapulted back into my childhood reading about these characters, and I forgot how much I loved Annie Oakley growing up. If you're a parent and you're like, oh, I want to get my kids to read, but I'm done with Harry Potter, I'm done with Percy Jackson, I would highly recommend reading these books, because not only are they so funny and entertaining, but they might just spark an interest in history for your kids or in literature. Like, they could end up reading Jane Eyre and actually love it and develop a love for classics. Another thing that made this book, I think, so unique from the past two books in the series is that the first two books had a very specific timeline in where they were allowed to tell their story. Because Lady Jane Grey was only queen for 9 days, there was a specific period in her time where they could tell her story. Jane Eyre obviously only happened within the confines of the novel Jane Eyre. But this book was about Calamity Jane, who was a real figure who lived a real long life, or as long as you could get in the Wild West. So I feel like the authors really took this opportunity to just go crazy with their storytelling. Their skills really came through because it was such an entertaining novel. The pacing was really good. I've never felt bored. It really kept me on my toes. The beginning might, for some people, be a little slow, but for me it was enough to get acclimated to the setting and to get used to how each character behaved and just the situation at hand. So I thought the pacing was perfect. I feel like it's such a ridiculous thing to say in a book review, but it's what made the book so much fun. There are werewolves in this book. Calamity Jane, Frank Butler, and Wild Bill Hickok, they are also werewolf hunters on the side. That's sort of where the story really starts. I can't give anything away because I knew nothing about where the story was gonna go, and I think that's part of the fun I had. Okay, we're gonna go, oh, we're on a horse, we're on a stagecoach, oh, who are we chasing? Again, like I mentioned earlier, you kind of know vaguely how Jane Eyre ends. You kind of know how Lady Jane Grey's life ends. But with this, it's like, where are we going? The authors are just gonna have to take us for a ride and you know what, I enjoyed every second of it. There's so many things I love about this book. The first being, I love how it totally breaks the cliche of if you have a super crime fighting team, there has to be only like one token badass female, and this book had two. Another thing that I really loved was, even though they were telling a very comedic version of history and the Wild West, they didn't whitewash the atrocities that the indigenous people faced back then. They did have several indigenous characters in the book. Obviously, I can't speak as to representation, but I do love how at the end, when everything is said and done, the authors, because they do break the fourth wall, they're like, you know what, we wish we could say they had a happy ending, but they have a hard road ahead of them. So I really like how it's not just like, and we save the day, and then they ride off into the sunset, like everything is actually gonna be better for people of color in the USA from then on, because it wasn't. So I really like how they managed to keep a comedic, lighthearted tone while still not dismissing the struggles that the indigenous people went through in the United States. My biggest fear going into this book was, oh, so they're just gonna be like riding on horses and shooting things and catching bank robbers, I guess. Okay, that's fine. That's not necessarily my thing, but I did love how they incorporated into the plot several elements of society aside from, you know, gunslinging and horseback riding, like quack medicine. It was a big part of the story, how people would come up with fake cures just to sell something, and magic. And I did a little research, and this was also around the time like The Greatest Showman was happening. There was a little reference to, you know, how easily audiences back then were blown away. They were like, oh, witchcraft, magic, amazing. And then now reading it, you're just like, this was so obviously fake. So I did love how this book managed to incorporate all those other elements of 1876 America. And the characters, they're just so gosh darn lovable. This might be a little spoiler for those of you who don't know the history as well as I do, even if I just said I didn't know anything about the Wild West. But Annie and Frank are in real life a couple. So in this book is also the origin story of their coupling. That's not a very nice word. Their romance. Just their love story in this book, which is a standalone, by the way, and I know we're not getting any sequels, has given me more killing than some love stories I've read that take 3 books to get together. It was so pure and innocent, and I really loved how in this book, it was really a relationship that ended up being built on mutual respect, and there was no, I'm gonna save her, she's a damsel in distress, I'm gonna save him, because sometimes books do that. They sort of flip it so that he's the damsel in distress and she saves him. But in this book, they were just totally on equal footing. They come from such a place of purity and innocence and love, and you're just like, oh my god, I want to be 16 again, but I don't want to go through pimples. It was just so cute. I will say that there is one thing I really was uncomfortable with in the book. I speak as someone who thankfully doesn't really need trigger warnings when she reads books. When I read books and something upsets me, for the most part, I'm really glad that it's been surface level. But without giving spoilers away, each protagonist in this book, Jane, Annie, and Frank Butler, pretty much orphaned at this point. They do recount their stories of their childhood. The book doesn't fail to highlight that, oh, she was 9 years old when she was left out to freeze. Reading about how they were abused as children, it was heavy, and I thought I was in it for a comedy. It made me very uncomfortable and really unsettled me. So if you're the type who wants to shy away from those kinds of books, I wouldn't suggest picking this up or skipping the chapters. And I'm gonna try my best to mark the chapter and leave it in the description box below. So that was really my only note about the book. I didn't expect it to get that dark. I'm just going to discuss the ending a little bit without giving any spoilers away, but then we're gonna jump ahead into the spoilers right after that. I think the entire third act of this book was one of the most exciting I've read in a while. It was just so entertaining, like, what now? Okay, now what? Oh my god, how are they gonna get out of it now? I don't think I ever went through life saying, I would love to read a Wild West book one day. Like I said, it's not really my thing, but it was the Wild West adventure I never knew I needed. And now for those of you who have read the book, all aboard the spoiler train. The only time I really got pissed at this book was when Wild Bill died. You put me through all those chapters on how all 3 protagonists suffered child abuse and emotional trauma, and now they have a found family with Wild Bill as their surrogate father. You're gonna kill him? At least for me, the way it was written wasn't like I expected a fake out was coming. They mourned. They went through the entire grieving process. I was like, I hate this book. Why is it making me so sad? But when he revealed that he never actually died because he was a werewolf himself, I was like, oh. It was the best. I really loved it, but I was also like, curse you for putting me through that emotional pain. I really loved how everything ended up. I don't think I would have changed anything when it came to the ending, but there was a time, I think, when they were crossing over from origin story to their own written adventure. The transition between those two parts was a little rocky, and it's like, oh, where are we going? Oh no, so many werewolves. I don't think that's realistic. And then nope, we're going completely off the rails. But other than that, you know, I really enjoyed it and I can't wait. There is gonna be a new trilogy by the authors, except this time they're going into the Marys of history. Their next trilogy will have Marie Curie, Mary Queen of Scots, and Typhoid Mary. That sounds like a lineup and I'm so excited, which is why this is technically the end of the trilogy, but I'm not as sad as I usually would be because I know more books are coming. But that about does it for my let's try that again. But that about does it for my Calamity Jane book review. Whew, wordy. You can follow me on my other bookish adventures on Twitter and Instagram. I'm both at Cuckoo for Books. Please subscribe and I will see you guys very soon. Bye guys!